already 10 years, because in 2007, first students started their studies at Liepāja University New Media Art Bachelor level program. And it was the first program in Latvia to be developed with a kind of new philosophy, new ideas about art as research and practice-based artist research. This approach to art education was actually very up-to-date then back, and can be described as strongly critical to neoliberalist treatment of art, and in Europe particular was also part of reaction from the side of art educators and practitioners to changes started by Bologna process in the space of higher art education. The approach was integrated with purpose into philosophy of new media art studies in Liepāja, and first of all by establishing MP Lab, one of the structural units of Liepāja University that is hosting this discussion now. The idea of art as a research activity is connected to the recognition of the dimension of science in art. And of the moment that art doesn't need commentary to become scientific. I'm thinking about this thesis as very challenging, and I hope that we will discuss it later. Similar to the science, where the goal of the product of actions is something new, emerging, new knowledge. The art can also be oriented on the development of knowledge in the process of artistic creativity through experimentation, observation, reflection, abstraction that influence the following processes of art making. The inquiry and experiment, as well as collecting and presentation of data about materials and environment the artist works with, is an essential part of the artistic activity, especially in the contemporary art. Based in practice, an artist is driven to the questions and hypotheses that later can change the course of and the result of her artistic work. Based in practice, art is also becoming more and more interested in life and involvement in social processes, practical issues, but also to the critical research is also an orientation important that brings to change and active action. Artistic research is tended to the new, but in its process is planned not only be something performative, but also transformative as action. This is why it's important to think about social responsibility and social engagement in the context of artistic research. Activity, engagement, orientation on the change, and reflected practice-based training are most important elements of contemporary art in order to encourage the development of social and cultural sustainability. This is why it's important in the education of young artists, and special place there should be reserved for understanding, in-depth understanding of society, its risks, and economic and political contexts in which also artists are working. The issue of sustainability, however, has to be treated in connection to the local communities. Socially responsible art as research is possible only by studying and integrating in the artistic research process the human needs in place where they emerge, and in active dialogue with the local communities. All these elements were integrated in the philosophy of Liepāja studies program. So I'm happy to be here. And for me, as I already said, all art is, at least in part, artistic. So you can see in the history of art from Leonardo da Vinci to William Hogarth and 20th century modernists, that artists are always experimenting around and actually also documenting their findings. The most evident tradition in the art research is coming from the Bauhaus tradition, which has had major impact on arts education around the world, and which combines artistic practice with technology and science, as well as philosophical and social aspects. In other words, shifting the focus from the art product to the process is important for creation, and from there back to the product itself. Offering access to knowledge in particular manner is important aspects of the artistic research. And another treasure in this approach, I think, is connected with artist's personality, because artist's personality type is characterized by developed imagination, intuition, creativity, and it's obvious for an artist to search for new, not only products, but also forms and approaches. And this is also the creativity that is closely connected to observation of the world. It's the way how the artistic works are actually created by observation, sensitivity towards world. And this is also related to the development of new ideas, new theses and tendencies that are later on flowing in the public space, because artistic language is also very much connected with rhetorics, and its performance is influencing the audiences worldwide. So one may say that in historical era, in history of art and history of culture, as well as today, even if there are some boundaries driven between art and science in the centuries after Enlightenment or during Enlightenment, we can see more and more that those boundaries are put away, that actually different disciplines, different fields converge, and it can be also suggested that it happens so again with art and science. However, there are always hard questions, especially if you start from the institutional point of view about relevance of artists' findings, about methods. And I'm happy to listen later on to Dani Ploeger's presentation in this discussion, because I think we will talk about methodology. Another thing that is important is to see that artistic research has gained more and more attention and clarity when we talk about advantages of such an approach that is lying in the knowledge of art and science. That is, it's not required to detailed commentary to become scientific. New knowledge is a goal of science and product. However, in many sciences, sometimes hypotheses and working questions are actually somehow making the approach also narrower. So, and in this way, art has advantage to probably jump over some kind of borders that are making scientists' work closer or narrower to its to his or her questions and hypotheses. So that's, I think, very important aspect, but the art that is researching at the same time as actually where it has its good side. So there are different ideas, and also essence of the art may be considered as including practice-based, that is exploring, using, and mobilizing contexts and showing and rendering art as socially useful, engaged, critical, but also applicable. Art was discussed also as oriented towards change and active action. Research and artistic research is striving for new, but its process is not only intended to be performative but transformative. So it's another thesis that I would like to discuss today: how far artistic research is having its stable identity, and how far it's treated, and probably treated by policymakers or by audiences because of the lack of knowledge about the approach as serving art as kind of marketing for art, for science, serving science and marketing for science. So art as research is also considered and discussed to be socially responsible and socially engaged, and probably we will have a time today to go into many aspects of this responsibility, and probably underline some topics that are important in artistic research worldwide. Actually, I also noted here that the change is something that artists probably always want. So, and in the end of our discussion, I would like to go on into changes and what's actually needed in the field, both institutionally and probably broader socially, let's say, in the public space, for people to really understand and identify and focus on this emerging and actually field in progress, as I would like to see it. Yeah, I think this is my point. But the first speaker I would like to give a word is Vytautas Michelkevičius, and Vytautas has a long practice in the field. So yeah, maybe you can actually talk about it in the context of institutionalization of the artistic research. Please, Vytautas.
Yeah, good evening. I hope you hear me well. Yes. Yes, so thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy that I can try to speak once again about these interesting issues in artistic research. And I have to admit myself that I am a failed artist, but successful researcher of artistic research. And I managed to change my career at the right time before I started to really fail as an artist, and now my practice is a little bit different. So I have a lot of things to tell you, but I think we still have, institutionalization of artistic research is still in a very early stage. And I like this kind of chaotic and wild situation in different fields and art centers and in art academies where very few people understand actually what is it, artistic research, and it's always introduced as a kind of more with a question mark than with a statement. And artistic research is kind of troubling research and always brings troubles both to artists and also to scientists and scholars, especially humanity researchers. So I have written quite a lot on this topic, a couple of books, and also did some exhibitions. So now I would like to share some condensed thoughts, which maybe will bring us later on into a discussion. And I have 20 minutes, so I try to squeeze my things. So now I'm starting to share my screen. And I hope you can see it, yes? Do you see my screen? Slideshow?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so welcome to identity crisis. This sentence was used once in my talk. I'm a scientist and I'm a researcher. I'm an artist. I'm a curator. Who am I? And this kind of question or statement brings a lot of troubles for these people who are not happy with their labels, and they don't somehow understand why they need this label to that you call somebody something. For example, you now at this point you are artist, at another point you are researcher, at the third point you are curator. I think we can fit all these identities all together, and we need some maybe time to accommodate ourselves to new identities, but hopefully by 2046 we will be done with that. Yeah, for example, if we have a look at this collection of 2 cartoons from Swedish artist Olof Westphalen. He produced them for our Congress on Artistic Research and Related Matters in October. And you see on the left side, we have a conversation between the artist researcher and the supervisor. And the artist is saying that new artistic research has shown that research is a Eurocentric colonialist project. And that's why he's going to the beach instead of following these stereotypical rules. And you see the supervisor is worried. And of course, it's true that it's something which is important to the artists' daily lives, and not all of them are happy with this research project. But artists have to do research, and there are a lot of questions how to deal with this question. And on the right side, you see another cartoon where supervisor is advising to the student, and it seems the student is happy that advice is good, that artists should write in a much smaller font. But then it turns out that the advisor says, no, you don't want people to actually read this. And this is always trouble for the artists who are studying bachelor or master or PhD, that they don't have a lot of, let's say, training in writing, and then we have to produce huge amounts of text in a short time. And quite a few of them fail, but of course, some of them may produce really nice writings. So this is 2 important issues which we should somehow solve in the next 10, 20 years, I hope, hopefully. I have also another proposal that we have to speak about artistic research as a business of trans epistemic communities. because it's very difficult to speak about artistic research as belonging to a community of art and also as a belonging to a community of research. It's somehow very hybrid and mixed, and I call this is a kind of domain of trans epistemic community, and I will tell you later what I mean by this. Yeah, so another question, which is also quite important, and it's sometimes appearing in my talks, is where is artistic research in the academy? Is it underground? Is it überground? Or is it at the rector's office? And in every case, you face different problems. If it's underground, so it means it's not yet recognized, and artists are not allowed to do artistic research in the academy. So it's kind of done in the shadow, in the black market of academia. If it's überground, so it means that it's already kind of in the future, and it's floating in the sky, it's recognized, and it's somehow integrated in the academy in all the levels, bachelor, master, and doctor. Or maybe it's at the rector's office, and the administration is asking or forcing artists to do research, because by doing research, you will receive more money and more funding. And funding is coming not only from art production, but also from research production. So you have to somehow reframe and that your artistic production is research production. And by this transposition, you produce not art but research, and your academy receives more money. So yeah, there are a lot of questions in this domain. But yeah, I was somehow intrigued by this invitation to speak a little bit about the lifestyle of artist researcher, which is certainly different from the lifestyle of artist and the lifestyle of researcher. And of course, we need more research into this topic. But last week I got this book, which is saying, yeah, it's saying, what do artists wear? And I think, yeah, it's a good question. It's very nice how this artificial intelligence is recognizing the body, but not reading the text. Yeah, so this is also important. Do artist researchers have different outfits than usual artists and usual researchers? By outfit, I mean not only physical appearance, but also kind of intellectual stance. Yeah, and of course, in some academies, it's lifestyle is very easy. It's easy life because you get a secured grant for free 4 years. Very, very few foundations and councils and grant givers give you grant for such a long period. So it means you can do your artistic work kind of for a very long time with very, let's say, with no need to apply for funding. Also, you have a good company because you have supervisors, which are internationally recognized artists and theoreticians and philosophers. So you can always speak with them, consult, have coffees, and exchange thoughts and ideas about your artistic practice and your life in general. But sometimes you face some problems as well, because you start to feel that you have to do a lot of writing, which was not the case before, and it's replaced. Writing replaces your artistic practice. And I have met quite a few doctoral students who are somehow struggling, and they said that they abandoned their artistic practice because they were concentrating into a new practice, writing. Well, of course, if you look into this issue from a longer distance of time, after 10 years, you might see that it was very useful but you are never sure when you complete your thesis very, very fast. Sorry, when you complete your thesis, you are not sure if you can do it. I mean, what was the use of it? Because, I mean, you spend a lot of time by writing. And I'm speaking now about these academies which don't recognize your artistic practice as research. I mean that some academies, they easily understand that art is research and there is no need for writing, but it's very, very few of them. At this moment, most of the artists have to produce 2 theses. I mean, they have to produce artwork, exhibition, a series of events, performances, etc. And also they have to write a book in which is somehow justifying your research, your practice as research. Sorry. Yeah, so this is a common trouble in quite a few programs of doctoral studies. Then you face another practical question: who will buy my work branded as made by Doctor of Arts? This is a question of relationship between art market, artistic research, and artistic practice. And you can put this question also from another point of view. You can ask, is the artistic work produced by Doctor of Arts better than produced by Master of Arts or Bachelor of Arts? And if it is better, why is it better, or why is it more valued? And does somebody want to pay more money for it? Maybe in the art market, no. And I know artists are sometimes hiding that they have a diploma of Doctor of Arts because it's not considered to be cool. They think you are academic artists, you are not kind of good enough, and you are not. Your value in the art market has not increased. But of course, in some places, maybe it might be valued and also included into auctions and sales. Of course, if you speak about the...
Vytautas, may I interrupt you? Because
yes.
I have a question right now, so probably we can
please.
more like a dialogue. I think coming back to your idea of lifestyle and changing of clothes, isn't it so that the young artists, especially after master program, for example, have actually interest to stay at the academy in the broad sense, just because it somehow is a home for them. They can see the future there connected to the practices they like, artistic practices, but in the same time be an independent artist outside the university or academia. It would be much harder, much more challenging. So I think, what do you think? Is this kind of changing of clothes sympathetic to people like this hypothetical young artist, because it gives an opportunity to stay with his or her ideas longer under the cover of studies?
Yeah, actually, I didn't get your question very much, but maybe I can try improvise a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, what I have noticed in recent, let's say, 5 years, in the summer schools for doctoral students, and also in some going to the conference and meeting other artists doing doctoral programs, we are not young artists. We are already artists with some kind of big amount of practice, and they are artists in their late 30s and 40s, and they are kind of already, some of them are quite established ones. So this tendency that you do or the doctoral studies right after your master's degree is not working anymore as it used to be in the early stage, I think.
But anyway, this is the process of identity searching for identity both as belonging to academia and the art and artist. So yes, I think we are right there with the most important question of the identity of artist researcher. Probably the number of or the age or number of years he or she spent in the field is not so important as the urge for studies or the need for studies. So I think, yeah, you painted the identity of the artist researcher as a kind of yeah, sitting between two chairs. Or yeah, I think, yeah. What can you probably elaborate about this question of double identity or blended identity? Or yeah, I think we are right there. I think at the most important question.
Yeah, I think it's triple identity at least, because you are doing your artistic practice, you're doing research practice, and also in some cases you become a writer. You write about what you do, and yeah, quite a few artists they do this kind of artistic writing, which is already kind of another field of practice.
Okay. But let me put it in the metaphor. So would you like to say that we still need to change our coats or dresses? Isn't it possible to just have it all on us at the same time, or to have this kind of, yeah, mixture? Because I think what I got from your presentation is that there is actually always this change from one identity to another, and no real blended identity. And this is actually difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, the identities are blended, and I am kind of enjoying these blended identities. But unfortunately, academia and our culture is very kind of slow and conservative and inertive. So I have experienced a lot of, let's say, clashes and fights between these people who want to have stable identities, and they are judging artist researcher from their own background or their own field, their own discipline. So this causes a lot of troubles, and I think this field of blended identities is still kind of developing, and it's rather small in my experience. So that's why I'm trying somehow to polarize a little bit and try to see that, to show that artists are sitting on several chairs, and I think it's really promising and has a lot of potential, but it will take a lot of time. But yeah, let's somehow go a little bit further into my questions, and then we can also continue the discussion. Yeah, so in the same lifestyle, there is also a question about how this Doctor of Arts is going to change my position in the career. There's some kind of uncertainty. Maybe I'm going to be overqualified in the job art market, or maybe I will get better positions, which is happening in some countries as well. So I just briefly want to share a recent text I wrote, one diagram from the text. But for example, this is a book, Creator Doctor's Constellation, and in this book we were kind of for trying to show examples of these blended identities of artists, researchers. And the idea was to show that it's possible to do, let's say, doctoral degree where the thesis or like a written part is not the main one, or it's not the leading one. And also we were trying to show some examples, like trying to find new models where a artistic project is somehow developed in collaboration with societal partner. It means, it could be a museum, a gallery, a laboratory of new media, and other things. Yeah, so you can find a lot of examples, and this book is online. If you Google it, you find a PDF. These examples are from these academies, and since we don't have a lot of time, I'm just jump to this point. And this was an essay about supervising and admitting artists to the programs. And you see the title is "Once I Was an Artist, Now I'm a Supervisor." I was kind of referring to myself, and I'm supervising now 7 artists with their doctoral projects, and yeah, with some interesting observations about this. So I was already speaking about these somehow images, that there is an image of PhD program from the outside, and also there is also some inside things. And so yeah, I already mentioned a few things, and I think it's quite important to be somehow open and understand that some things you can get and some things are not included in this project. And I hope you can find about these things more. But let's move forward further, and I will go through quickly to, yeah, there are a lot of problems in this field, but I wanted to somehow finalize my statement about the 6G of artistic research in the academy. And this is a parallel to mobile networks. You know that 1G, third generation, was the network which was based on mostly on very low and slow data transmission, and you could transfer only text messages, like short text messages, SMS, or old school Twitter. So the first programs of artistic research for the artists was only in the humanities, with no practice at all. So it means that artists could do a normal traditional PhD thesis, and then they get a degree, and the practice was not counted at all. So this was popular in the 90s in some countries and schools. When it came 2G, second generation, and this is practice-led thesis, where artist is defending still a traditional written thesis based on his or her artistic practice. But still, the majority of the thing is written, and the artistic art is not understood and presented as research. And luckily, technology and also understanding of art as research was developing, and we arrived at the third generation model. And this is the place where practice-based thesis is defended together with artwork, but written thesis is highly regulated, and it means that artist has to prepare and defend 2 theses. So this is the dominant paradigm now in most of the art schools. So the community somehow agrees that art can be research, but you need a special written part where you explain why and how art is understood and treated as research. So we have this paradigm also in our Vilnius Academy of Arts at this moment. If you make a parallel with communication networks, you know that 3G is already this type of connection where some images can be transmitted. So it means that you can transmit some parts of some formats of art, but videos are very slow, for example. So this is a metaphoric approach that research community still doesn't understand how and why only visual or audio data can be treated as research without, let's say, propositions and statements written in the text. So in most of the schools, we are at this stage, but of course, some schools have already 4G. The connection is much better. You can watch videos, maybe also 4K videos, high definition, and sometimes interactive artworks as well. So this is a practice in the front thesis, and you defend your artwork to give a reflection in any form. So it means that the focus is on the artwork, but still you have to provide a short reflection, which is not defined. So you can write a short essay, you can do a video reflection, you can do, I don't know, podcast, whatever. But you have still to somehow prove that your art is research. But of course, the focus here is on artistic production. So this is already possible in Norway and Finland and some other countries. It's kind of quite important paradigm. And 5G, which is now to come in telecommunication networks, is that artwork is defended as a PhD thesis. So practice as research is treated in its full speed. And at that case, it's very good that you don't need to say how and why my art project is research, because it's kind of obvious already from your art project. So this is possible already in some schools, for example, in Australia. And this is our kind of goal as well for the future. And what will happen next, nobody knows. But I've read that 6G is already developing, and some tests are being done in Finland in the telecommunication industry. And 6G will arrive in 5 years for sure in our smartphones. But will it arrive in our academies? Nobody knows. And in what form as well. So, I mean, these kind of, it's also important to mention that this 6G is also historical paradigm and historical development, but of course they can exist at the same time of in one school or in one country. And artists can choose which type of thesis we would like to do. And my question is mostly about the freedom of freedom for artists, that they could choose what we want to do, and also flexibility of the research community. If you have your research community developed until the 5G level, so then it means that your the epistemic community is very hybrid and is willing to understand that your artwork is presenting new insights, new knowledge. It's questioning the boundaries or limits of your discipline or of your field. And there is no need for written explanation or justification that something was developed in your artistic project. Yeah, so this is a question of the freedom, and if you have this freedom, your lifestyle is very kind of free. Yeah, this is kind of the end of my statement, I think, for now.
Thank you very much. I think that you already pointed on some problems here with the total freedom paradigm, because one of the things that are always checked in the academical context is methodology. So if the artist is free, he will probably also go to develop his or her own methods. And then the problem is, can we really trust the method? So this is a question of what I would like to pose to our next speaker, Dani Ploeger, who will, I hope, explain here based on his own experience.
Hello, can you hear me? And can you see my screen as well?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's not full now.
No, I will. Now it is, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. I have been asked to speak a bit about some examples of my own work in relation to methods or methodologies in artistic research. So I prepared a little talk in which I will talk a bit about more general idea that I base my work on in terms of methodologies and the place of this kind of research in academia, and then followed by, as requested, a few examples of work I've done in relation also to a book I've just published that has some texts that contextualize the work or that form in some ways the kind of basis of from which the work has been developed. So artistic research on the frontiers of techno-consumerism. I'll explain, of course, what that means in a bit. My suggestion in terms of viewing is this, but of course it's up to you. I won't go back and forth between full screen and me. So if you put it on side-by-side mode and you do as under 2, you move that middle bar, you can see me as big as the slides, because some of the slides are not so exciting. So I'll start with a little video. This is a work I made in 2017 and 18 on the front line in Ukraine as an example of a research-based work or a work that is part of a research process. And I'll talk about this later on. This is a 16mm film. It's a transfer of digital footage that I shot with my own phone while I did a field research project in which I accompanied soldiers on the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war in the east of Ukraine in 2017. Now, the question I'm interested in with this work in relation to the issue of research is, in what way is it in the first place relevant to even talk about whether this is research or not? Video art or film art has been made for generations now, and you could just present this work, I would say, as, you know, it's just an artwork. The question whether this is research or not is not always relevant to me, but in my specific approach to working, there's a lot of crossover with methods that are exercised in other disciplines in the humanities fused with artistic strategies. So talking about methods, I would like to give this as a kind of preamble. My approach to research and art or artistic research is very much pragmatic. And what I would say, one thing is that I notice now, there's a tendency these days for artists to call pretty much anything they do research, right? They're going on Google to figure out something for new works. They're saying, oh, I'm doing research for my new work. They're going out in the street to collect some stuff to put in whatever, installation or painting. I'm doing some field research to collect materials. In principle, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It doesn't matter. You can call anything research you want to call research. It's fine. When you start to do research in academia, or the question arises, do we want to start to make art in a university or in an art academy where we call it research in relation to traditions of research in the academy? I think it's important to ask the question, why would you want to do that? I mean, there's of course the obvious answer, which is a pragmatic one. Arts funding is cut all over the place in Europe, and a lot of artists just start calling their work research just because like that you can get money from the EU, right? There's a lot of people who do PhDs, not because they're really into research, they're actually doing it to get money to fund the work. And I absolutely agree with that, right? I think that's legitimate. I think it's legitimate to rob banks. I think it's legitimate to become a mercenary to fund art. I mean, that nothing against that. But what I'm interested in then, when we really talk about research in the academy, is not that sort of pragmatic business. I mean, that's fine, we can talk about that, but that's not really what I'm after. For my work, the work that I make, it is important to work with methods of the academy, of the humanities mainly, and then in my approach to research, what is of interest to me is, for example, somebody like Edward Wilson, who's a biologist who published this book in 1998, in which he argues for what he calls consilience, and what he makes an argument there where he says that what the academy should strive for is an integration of disciplines, where these disciplines can communicate with each other in their joint project of furthering knowledge and developing new knowledge. Now, the actual argument Wilson makes, I'm not so fond of that, right? He's a biologist, and he kind of tries to boil everything down to genetics, and then kind of argues, oh, the humanities should kind of join this project as well. That's a kind of contents issue. But the general idea that the point of the academy is a kind of joint project to further knowledge, I like that very much. And when I think about artistic research in universities, I did a PhD in the UK, the University of Sussex. My interest is really like that as well. So my question is really, you can make all sorts of art, and not all art needs to be research, doesn't all need to be in the university or whatever. But for some, there can be an interest to do art in the university as research, in a kind where you get a kind of constellation where these artistic practices start to communicate with humanities and science and kind of contribute mutually. For that, it is important that the methods that are used have some possibilities for connection. So I personally think that the whole issue about artistic research, which doesn't have research questions, which doesn't have any written component, which is completely different from any kind of traditional research, I don't see the point in that from a kind of, apart from the pragmatic reasons you might have to get the EU funding or whatever, or do your work, I don't really see the point of doing that in university, because that sort of research, that's been done in art forever, and I think that's great and whatever. I mean, but I think if we really think about why we would genuinely want to do this in the university, not just because we were kind of pragmatic, why would we want to sit there with all those humanities scholars and those scientists? I think the answer should be because there is an interesting consilience which will make other or new kind of art that is maybe more interesting or more exciting or whatever, and that might also facilitate things for these other disciplines to get them to places they might not go if they would not be in interaction with artistic methods. So that's the kind of thing that I will try to talk about a little bit in the continuing here. So now, back to the title of the talk. I'm interested in everyday technologies. Why am I interested in technologies? Not per se because I'm so fond of the latest gadgets around me. I often yell at my computer and I hate a lot of the gadgets I have. Much more because I see these everyday devices like the mobile phone, the laptop, the tablet, etc., Internet of Things, as the kind of pinnacle of what John Gray, the culture critic, has called the myth of progress. The myth of progress, he argues, entails this idea that technology, per default, any kind of technological innovation in itself brings relief from any kind of problem humans might have. So technological innovation per definition equals progress. So in this sort of paradigm, technologies are ideologically disconnected from their materiality. So issues of waste, they are disconnected from often their roots in military endeavors, their complicity in violence. They're also disconnected often from the fluidity, the dirtiness, the inconsistency of human bodies or bodies of other animals and things in the world. So I'd like to look at these consumer technologies because they are kind of on the very, very tip of what I see the perversity of ideology in consumer culture, which in the end is this idea that we can accumulate stuff ad infinitum and always create more things without there being any sort of consequence in terms of people being exploited or ecosystems collapsing. So now, how do we study this? In the humanities, scholars have been dealing with this thing for a long time, right? Particularly these everyday devices that we deal with, and the kind of person at the root of cultural studies into the everyday. One of them, a famous one, is Henri Lefebvre. He wrote this book, Critique of Everyday Life, actually 3 volumes. The first one came out in 1947. And what he argues is that if we really want to understand how this kind of seduction of these products and this kind of myth of eternal progress and stuff, how that works, we should not look at the factories and everything in the first instance, but just at what people do when they're at home, when they're on the street in their own time or doing their own, so the everyday life. And the best place, he then argues, where we can look for maybe places, kind of signs of this homogeneous ideology of consumption and purchase, where it breaks up. That's, he says, it's the festival, la fête. So the carnival, that in its kind of root form, but also the fun fair, kind of street demonstrations, all these kind of things. That's kind of his thing. And he kind of argues that's what we should look at if we want to understand how consumerism or how kind of capitalism in the everyday operates. Now, I take a slightly different approach to that, and I will go in a second. I'll talk about what kind of role art plays in this. I'm very intrigued and interested by this publication by Patel and Moore, 2 global studies scholars, who argue that the very logic of capitalism is not necessarily destruction and exploitation in the first instance, but rather, and of course the exploitation and destruction are part of that, but rather in the first place, a quest for cheap stuff. Everything needs to go cheaper labor, cheaper resources, cheaper money, cheaper healthcare, everything cheap. So in that sense, they say, capitalism is a frontier technology. It will always try to look for a new place where it's a little bit cheaper, or a new place where there is another kind of market where you can sell stuff. So different from Lefebvre, who argues you should look at the center of consumerism to see for these places where it cracks up. I would say we have to look at the frontiers, those places where consumerism is kind of in the process of establishing or in the retreat. That's where the things crackle, because in the center of consumerism, and at the fun fair in Disney World, if you like, obviously these places are heavily regulated, and especially now in late capitalism, you always see that the system already incorporates its own failure in a way, right? It's kind of the satire, as Zizek says, is already calculated in the very logic. The places where you see things that were not expected, I would argue, are on the fringes, on the waste dump where the electronics end up, on a front line in a war that does not correspond with the commonplace idea of high-tech war, where people are using these everyday devices. Also, and I'll come to that later, at the trade fair, where we kind of get a so much heightened state of this consumer ideology that these devices collapse. So what I'm interested in is everyday technologies in extreme circumstances. Now, what are extreme circumstances? Of course, that's relative, right? We can say anything extreme or not. It depends on what somebody's used to. I mean this from the perspective of the paradigm within which these technologies are developed, imagined, and marketed. So if we think about this device here, this phone, if you look at the advertising, if you look at the writing about it by the manufacturers, this has been produced with basically the space I am in now in mind, right? A kind of everyday life in the global north. The moment this thing is used by soldiers in eastern Ukraine in the no man's land, it is in an extreme circumstance because this was not imagined, not envisaged by the people who made it. So what I'll do in the next sections is look at 3 works which I developed in places that I would call extreme circumstances. And I'll talk a little bit about ideas of method there as well. As you can see here, and which I maybe suggested before already, a lot of my work is based on field research that borrows from anthropology, but then kind of goes in different directions in terms of method as well. So I often go to these places or these circumstances and I kind of try to test things out, observe them, or involve in these. So what I'll show in the following, the front line in the Donbas War, which you already saw, in Shirokine, a small place on the Sea of Azov in Ukraine. Dandora dump site, which is one of the biggest dump sites in Eastern Africa, in Nairobi, and the surrounding flea markets. And then lastly, the IFA Consumer Electronics Trade Fair in Berlin, which is the biggest trade fair for new electronics in Europe, where I worked. I'll show you later on. I'll do this in the context of, as I already said, some text fragments from a book I just published. So my work, my artwork stands on itself usually. And the texts in this book are also standalones, if you like. They're not texts about art or about artistic research, but they are texts about the same topics that the art is about, and they kind of overlap in a way. So they can be perceived or read together, but they don't have to be. In this case, I will kind of link them together a bit, because it also reveals a bit about how, what the process of my work is or might be like. So
I ask a question here. I have a question regarding just before you start to talk about immediately about your work, about reading, because
about what?
Reading.
Reading, yes.
Where the ideas come from. So it's probably reading part, or let's say seeing other artworks, important part in the development of own idea.
It comes from different places. Actually, to take this project in Ukraine as an example, what triggered this project was a combination of various things. The first thing was I lived in Palestine in the mid-2000s, and there I experienced a situation of civil war, if you can call it that, in terms of its discrepancy with commonplace representations of war in media or news. In terms of when you watch the news, a war is people shooting at each other and stuff going on. If you live in a place like that and the Ukrainian front line is the same, most of the time there's nothing going on. And there's a certain really disturbing tension there because something might happen all the time. That was part one. Then a few years later, I saw a work by Arnoud Mick, the Dutch video artist, which you might have heard of. He made a work in the beginning of the 2000s in which he used, and it's called raw footage from 2003, I think. He took press video footage from AP or something like that of the Yugoslavia war. And he took all the outtakes, so the raw footage, so to say, the stuff that was not in the news. And I saw that and I thought, wow, this is it. I mean, he showed that this waiting and this really disturbing tension, like you saw like a young kid playing with an unloaded gun while the soldiers were there having a break, you know, that sort of stuff. So that was the second thing. Then I was in Ukraine. And I, for some reason, and I thought as a kind of concept, I want to go to the end of Europe. So I took the train to the last stop, like 20 kilometers behind the front line. So there I actually saw these soldiers, and I thought, wow, this is somehow related to what I remembered myself as well. So then this was the basis for this work. Then I read Ernst Jünger, the sociologist, the kind of proto-fascist German writer who wrote this report of his experience of the First World War and theorized about that. And he also talks about this kind of agony of waiting. So this all went into the basis of the work. Then I went to the front line and I told the fixer, I went as a journalist, basically, because you can't go in another way. I want to go to places on the front line where nothing happens. And I want to see or experience or whatever, observe how the soldiers there interact with these everyday technologies. That was the quest. And then I got into a firefight, which is what you just saw. And then that took off in another direction, which I'm going to take now. So it's usually it's a combination of everything, and this is exactly what I mean by this consilience, that I find things there that somebody who is just an anthropologist might not see, something that a journalist might not experience. And and of course, a journalist will see things that I don't. You know, it's not that I'm better, but this offers a new perspective, so to say. That's my kind of main point. If that answers the question.
Yes. It's a good model. I mean, understandable model.
So I'll read a few short fragments of the booklet that relate to this this trip to the front line. By the way, here this is with the two volunteer fighters of the Ukraine volunteer corps. This is a far right unit there, which I accidentally ran into, and you can see them here. This guy Steinar, he's holding his GoPro and his phone, and this is just behind the front line, right? This is on the outpost. We've just been under fire there, and they're actually checking their footage. So this was really the thing that triggered me. Thinking back to this experience on the front line, it feels like I was in a split temporality. In some ways, I seem to have gone back in time. The soldiers' Soviet-era AK-74S assault rifles and their partly improvised uniforms remind me of film footage of ground warfare in Vietnam and Afghanistan in the mid-20th century. But this is contradicted by the electronic gadgets that featured prominently at the same time. The soldiers alternately shoot with mid-20th century weapons and contemporary audiovisual technologies. Thus, this war seems to be a kind of temporal hybrid where fighters simultaneously navigate a contemporary and an historical technological paradigm. My perception of a seeming contradiction in this juxtaposition of technologies is not that surprising, though, considering that I've grown up in a media environment that has long emphasized the high-tech aspects of warfare conducted by European and North American nations. Since the Gulf War in the early 1990s, media representations of war have increasingly focused on the role of advanced technological weapons and navigation systems. During Operation Desert Storm, for example, in 1991, the US and Allied forces introduced the embedded journalism system. And in response to that, where reporters' access to the battlefield was restricted to units and places designated by the military. In response to experiences with media reports that had represented US military operations unfavorably during the Vietnam War, and which had had a significant impact on the loss of public support for the war effort in the United States. So what you see from the 1990s is not this, right? Yeah, in Western warfare, you kind of stop seeing this kind of dirty ground war, these people in trenches with Kalashnikovs and all this kind of stuff. You just see these drone footage and all these things. But then, I won't read too much now because we don't have so much time. But then what I kind of call the dialectics of post-digital warfare then is in a very weird way that these guys don't have access to these high-tech weapons, right? None of the sort. This is all old stuff, this old stock from the Soviet Union still. But they do have access to all these handy devices that arguably are the offspin of high-tech warfare. So in a kind of dialectical movement at the point where these devices, these high-tech electronic things that were kind of promoted and pushed through these endless images of war is now high-tech, our whole society is high-tech. High-tech leads to this kind of myth of progress idea, a clean war where only the good guys, do the good things and the bad guys get hit. In a kind of weird movement, now these soldiers have these gadgets, and as a result, they make this footage of this kind of war that we started to think doesn't exist anymore and put it on the internet. Go on YouTube, you can find headcam footage of American soldiers being surprise ambushed. You can see Islamic State fighters doing their terrible things. You can see these guys with their weird ideologies doing this war. So you get this kind of turnaround. Now, this is the kind of intellectual argument, if you like. But then this video, which I'll show. Show a little fragment again. This does all sorts of things to kind of heighten that, right? Transferring this to 16 millimeter, was really a deliberate strategy to highlight the kind of anomaly or the strangeness of these electronic gadgets that you see there all the time. So I'm kind of shifting this focus in this thing. And what that means exactly, of course, there is stuff about this, which is kind of eerie, which also has to do with this thing. I have a selfie shot of myself in there, which you would never do with 16mm. It also shows my kind of involvement in this kind of battle dress, the kind of, you know, boy's adventure, which is very iffy. So the kind of artistic dimension of this in terms of my interest in it is that it kind of starts to reveal things that the text can't really unpick. Or it kind of heightens a certain dimension that then it works differently from just kind of saying it in a text like I just did, so to say. So that was example or case study one. The second case study is related to this object you see on the right, which is a film projector, but it doesn't really work anymore. And it's called Oroda. I will, is it explained in my text? No, it isn't. Oroda is a Swahili word that literally means something like junk, but in Kenya, and I think also other parts of East Africa, but in Kenya, that's where I worked. Oroda is used to designate a certain segment of products that are sold on secondhand markets that are usually broken. It's the kind of very, it's just before they really are on the dump, and often they also come from the dump. So they're kind of liminal objects. The Oroda market is a market for things that might be broken, that you might get some stuff from, but might also be something else. A short fragment. On the Oroda market, one can find almost any imaginable everyday object, ranging from television remote controls and kitchen devices to toys and plumbing articles. For many things, the use possibilities are clear. An old remote can serve as a replacement. A broken kitchen blender can be harvested for spare parts. And plastic dolls can be readily used by kids to play with, even if some of the limbs are missing. However, there are also Oroda items for which the possible use value is not that straightforward. This objet trouvé, so the projector you see on the right on the screen, the remains of a slide projector are an example of such an object. It can no longer be restored to its original state because too many parts are missing. Besides, there were no slides on offer in the stall where it was sold, and neither the salesman nor any bystanders were aware of anybody who might still have some. And of course not, because slide projection, this is in the slums, right, where you buy these things. There was never such thing as slide projecting in slums in Nairobi, because it's kind of a European middle class thing, which maybe some people in the more prosperous neighborhoods have, but the people don't have slides there. Of the device's electrical components, only the cooling fan and the mains cable remain. The fan still works, and its metal blades make it look like a robust component for today's standards. However, it can hardly be used as a spare part in contemporary electronic devices. Their fans usually operate at 12 volts, while the one in our projector here is powered with 220 to 240 straight from the power grid, because the transformer is integrated in the motor. So it's also not useful as a kid's toy. They probably electrocute themselves, they would plug it in. And when queried, the salesman then tells me it's a projector, but when I asked whether he thought it can be repaired, he just laughed at me. He then took a projector lens from his pocket, which is the black thing, the loopy thing you see on below the projector, which he put into the hole in front of the object. It doesn't really fit and clearly belongs to another device, but that didn't seem to bother him. So here we get the kind of mysterious thing around this object, right? Because it's not the kind of commodity that you buy in a shop for new things, where it's, even you can say with the phone, you can be creative with it, but there's a very clearly defined domain, which is envisaged as its realm of use. And this device then actually is something else. Yeah? Here, the potential buyer in a way is offered an opportunity to become part of the world of high-tech consumer culture. It's clearly framed, this is a projector. But they will not merely become a consumer of a pre-manufactured technology. The trading process implies that the buyer needs to do something with this thing, but what exactly remains unspecified. Stripped of any possibility to regain the functionality in terms of its original identity as a classic piece of European consumer technology, it will never be a projector again, that's clear. The object has become a material stimulus to imagine and create a technology that goes beyond the commonplace logic of everyday techno-consumerism. That's the end of my little text in the book. Now, the question of which is, yeah, so what then? What can it become? And this is then where an artistic project that I made with two colleagues there in the wake of this observation, this kind of analysis comes in. And I'll show you, this is another in between. It's part of a bigger project. This Roda item, I found that in 2019 in Lagos. Earlier, I was in Nairobi. Earlier, a few years before, I was in Lagos in Nigeria, together with it was a group of artists, cultural theorists, and also some toxicologists, scientists. What we did, we collaborated in or engaged in electronic waste recycling. So the kind of what you do with these devices when you recycle them, you take the raw material out. So what you see here is me taking copper out of a coil from an old television. The interesting thing that happened through the research, among other things, which I won't go into detail of, is that when I went to do this project in Lagos, my idea was like, oh, this is the kind of, this is how in sub-Saharan Africa, typically recycling is done. But what kind of became more and more clear through this kind of involvement, that this is actually a very typically European approach to reusing or recycling stuff, right? When something's done, or you throw it away, the recycling consists of completely breaking it down into all these kind of individual components. There we kind of feel the resonance also of like what Foucault writes about how Europeans deal with the body, right? As a kind of collection of kind of separate things. So you take all these things apart, like here the copper, and then you send them all back to a factory. And then in the factory, it's turned into a new kind of brand new consumer object, which again has these clearly defined use values, and it's kind of far away. So then what the project shifted towards is what I just showed you here, this kind of stuff, right? These kind of mysterious things, but also these practices of refurbishment and repurposing, which are not these kind of large-scale global industrial endeavors of taking stuff down into little bits. Now, the film then that I made, and I'll show you a short fragment, which is about two minutes, kind of reframes that sort of approach. So I'll just show you and then I'll tell you. Here it goes. This actually is a 16mm film. This is the digital original, but it runs on 16 as well, but for similar reasons as the other film I showed before. So here I basically perform what I learned in Lagos, right? So I do the kind of typical electronic waste recycling, which fits into this global idea of stripping the valuable material and sending it off for remaking. But there's another realm in this film, which we will enter now. So there's more in the film, and there's 55 layers, which I will not talk about all. But the main idea here is that in this first scene, which normally is portrayed as a kind of typical workshop where the black bodies operate, right? With the best intentions, oh, the poor Africans, they are in the mess and they have to deal with this thing. And this film kind of reverses it in the way that I am the dirty person who is doing that sort of primitive recycling. And then there is a kind of sci-fi, the whole thing is a sci-fi thing. There's this kind of under-earth sci-fi room in which these refurbished everyday objects appear. The one that I just showed, the Oroda piece, is a kind of objet trouvé, but the other ones you saw there were the outcomes of workshops I did together with the two collaborators I have, Joanne Otieno, Greenman Mulembilo, two artists in Nairobi, together with a few other people, anthropologists, repair people, etc., etc. And the object you see in the second scene, they were all made by people in those workshops from the starting point of, let's not think about technologies as these sort of, myth of progress solution to things, but let's think of them as artifacts that stand in a tradition of local or personal memories and myths in relation to how technologies mediate the world. So you saw that old radio there with this little ritual that was done on it. This is a piece by Greenman, my friend and colleague there, which is based on a traditional ritual instrument that is used by healers in his tribe. So here then in this film, this kind of theoretical exercise of, oh, wow, this Oroda piece is kind of mysterious, and oh, it calls us to some sort of action, which is also the kind of typical cultural theory masturbation, right? Oh, everything is really interesting. It's so like, oh, somebody crumbled this. It's a critique of consumerism. Like, that's great, but I think there is some merit in then kind of doing these hypothetical exercises, and that's what art can do, and then turning into something like imaginary. So I tried in this film to make this sort of imaginary world. I mentioned there's a reference to these 1950s ethnographic film, which has this kind of typical format of people in the bush and all this kind of stuff. The film I made is on 16mm, and it kind of mimics, therefore, this sort of typical ethnographic style, but then reverses some of the things. As I said before, I'm this sort of primitive person on this dump doing this recycling there. So I'm aware that running out of time, I'll just quickly browse through the last thing. That will just take like 3 minutes. I won't read any deep text, but this is the third round. The heart of techno-consumerism, I call this is the title of the chapter. I applied for a little job. I basically infiltrated in Philips, and I worked as a sales representative on this big trade fair in Berlin in 2017. This is in German, but you'll get the idea. I'm promoting a fantastic high-tech shaving device. Oh, oops.
Jetzt geht's richtig ab. Hier, das rotiert schneller als alle anderen Rasiergeräte, die wir haben. Und es benutzt V-Track Pro Technologie. V-Track Pro Technologie ist das, was hier der Unterschied macht. Was ist V-Track Pro Technologie? Das ist das hier. Es gibt einen Punkt hier, diese V-förmige Öffnung. Und da ist das Metall ganz, ganz dünn. Da unten gibt es Klingen, die bewegen, auch V-förmig. Was passiert nun? Es gibt ein Haar. Weil es so bewegt, wird diese Haar zu diesem dünnen Punkt geführt. Was passiert nun? Die Haare werden nur dort abgeschnitten, wo es eigentlich gar keinen Abstand mehr gibt zur Klinge. Das ist eine richtig glatte Rasur. Und weil da auch die Klinge super, super scharf ist, ist das eine Trockenrasur, wo man überhaupt keine Details mehr empfindet.
So, very briefly, what oh, there's some car passing by. What really intrigued me here is in this sort of, this is also interesting because in a way, this is also not the envisaged environment for the shaver, right? It's an extreme circumstance in terms of that it's not actually used here. It just becomes a prop in a kind of a theater performance of infinite progress through technological innovation. What really fascinated me here is that the terminology, so this thing, this shaving device has V-Track Precision Blade Pro, 8-directional contour detect technology, and aqua tech. So the names of these technological feats of the shaver, they're almost exact mimics of what you get of what I mentioned in the book, computer components like the Asus H170 Pro Gaming ATX motherboard or the Intel Core 2 Quad Processor Q66000. There is the kind of representation of this formerly banal consumer object, right? Your dad would give you a brown shaver in Germany in 1960, and you would use it for 30 years. Now, we were told, if somebody says, I already have a Philly Shave 9000 series, you have to answer, but do you have the one with the new VTrack Pro technology? The strategy is to extend this realm of rapid obsolescence and the science fiction narrative to the most banal everyday objects, and the shaving device is one of the kind of victims you see here. So then I kind of read that from the perspective of Baumann, who then argues that, Zygmunt Baumann, the philosopher, who says that in solid modernity, like modernity old style, we used to have the concept of health. So you're healthy if your body does what you want to do with it, you can work with it or whatever, and you're unhealthy when it doesn't do that. And then he says in liquid modernity, which is his kind of word for post-modernity, we've moved to a concept of bodily fitness. And the difference is that fitness has no end. You can be very fit, but you can always be fitter. There's never an end to fitness, so it's endless consumption. And what I argue then is you kind of see this reflected also in these devices. They become this sort of liquid modern thing. Anyway, so far so good. That's the kind of theoretical reflection. The work I made is this here, and this is the last I'll show, so no fear, and in a minute we'll be done. I ordered this industrial machine, which you see in the middle, from China, which is used in electronics factories to test the durability of devices. So it's actually a destructive machine that destroys the kind of polished, beautiful object of a consumer object, but it always happens behind the screen. It happens in the factory, right? You don't see it. I made this work with it in which the footage of me selling this shaving device, which you just saw, is combined with one of those shaving devices being in this destructive machine in the so-called laboratory of electronic aging. This is in German, 1 minute, but you get the idea. This is what it does.
Eine industrielle Sturztestmaschine für Elektroartikel lässt wieder und wieder einen
So it rotates, it simulates that you drop something from a meter from your hand, so to say. But in the exhibition now, it doesn't do it once or twice, it does it ad infinitum. So it transforms the shaving device back to its kind of bare materiality. So the kind of shining performance of this thing as something that doesn't have materiality, which is only progress, is kind of linked back in this sort of weird double installation to it only becoming some sort of a material object. So also here then, this is not something that the kind of theoretical narrative can just kind of synthesize, right? There is something about aestheticizing the destruction process, which is very kind of double, kind of Gustav Metzger, so there's an artistic kind of context. The destructive process is a process of creation, but it also kind of tries to unveil this very logic of consumerism through this creative constellation where these opposing and somewhat confusing things are kind of put together in one installation. So that was my little talk. If you want to reach me, send me any complaints, questions, or pretty pictures, there's my email. You can Instagram me. And the little book is this one. If you want it, it's easiest and cheapest to order it directly from the publisher in England, Trariki Press, or from my gallery in Berlin. You can find it on Amazon as well, but you don't want to sponsor that, of course. So yeah, in case you want it, if you don't want it, it's even cheaper. It's free then. It's free not to get it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to start the part of discussion with actually my reflection again in metaphors. The metaphor of cup, I reconsidered my intro, and I think I was actually wrong in talking so much about new, because I think your work, for example, is showing that what artist is doing is exactly the opposite. It's actually kind of introducing new through old, or trying to make a gap in this kind of running, the neoliberal capitalist running after everything new. Yes, would you like to elaborate this point? That the artist is actually aiming on making a pause or a gap to turn our attention back to some kind of basics or life. Is it a difficult question?
For whom is the question?
The question is for Dani first.
Oh, for me. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I think I do that. I mean, in the way, it's kind of a very a Marxist project, right? The kind of superstructures. Oh my God, alienating bullshit. So what I'm trying to do is to kind of bring in these different perspectives on something that is often presented as a more or less homogeneous narrative. But I would really not want to speak about what the artists are doing. I think one issue is also that this kind of work I do is now quite popular, right? I have nice exhibitions and all these things. There's also a lot of artists who are painting, who are doing whatever kind of great work. It's not so trendy, also because they're not doing this. I think we should be very careful. Like, you know, some artwork like mine thrives in this sort of research context and this kind of idea of cultural criticism and all this kind of stuff. But there is also artwork that you know, that does different things on different terms, and I think that's, you know, important to acknowledge.
Another question then I would like to ask to Vytautas, but coming back or referencing your work. So we have seen Dani Ploeger in very different suites or dresses or coats. Coming back to your presentation, Vytautas, would you consider that the artist as researcher, or if he's working also in the area of art as journalism, I would call it like that, is always actually changing the clothes before audience's eyes, and also very much involved in the whole experimentation, not from outside, but somehow from inside. No, of course, there are different artists and different artworks, but if you just think of the tendencies that are probably most represented in the contemporary scene.
Yeah, somehow you are tonight trying to pose very difficult questions. I really enjoyed your artistic projects, but I think we are not now at the fashion show, and it's difficult to judge your clothes and and all the appearances, and try to guess when you were doing what and what kind of artist or researcher you were.
Okay, coming from media sides, one may say that journalist is one of the most dangerous professions in the world. Would you say that the artist as researcher is also playing with fire?
Yes, of course. It's very dangerous because you are trespassing the borders of disciplines and fields and comfort zones. And I mean, you are moving through different levels, let's say, of society and different types of researchers, and you collect some enemies on your way, as well as also supporters and fans and followers. So maybe Dani can tell us if he experienced some dangers in his projects. It feels like you are searching for them, maybe.
I experienced some dangers in my projects, but not. It's not more dangerous because I'm an artist, right? I mean, look, it's much more dangerous to work on an e-waste recycling site all year round than me going there. I mean, of course, there are some security issues, but these are all And the way I work, but then there are so many ways of working. The way I work, it's not, in terms of that sort of stuff, right? Just pragmatically speaking about the security issues, health issues, and things like that. That's like journalism. You know, that's like my thing on the front line there was as dangerous as it is for somebody who does frontline journalism. I did something slightly different there, but just kind of practically speaking. And also I did hostile environment training for journalists and military contractors in preparation of that trip. So I've been trained and prepared like anybody else who does that. So, but I think then what you refer to, the kind of danger of the kind of maybe more not physical, metaphorical danger, right? In terms of being in an institution where you kind of trespass the borders and things like that. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the word precarity is kind of good in connection with that, right? It's a very precarious situation that you move in, because you continuously have to justify why this is worthwhile. So you tap into different kind of danger issues, because in a way it's also my job in the academy is a lot less dangerous than that of, say, a historian of Byzantine writing. Because I can very easily make the claim I do interdisciplinary research that has impact outside the academy, because I had all these ideas. Try that if you do historical research, right? So sometimes I feel bad about my projects because I kind of feel that I can do all these things, right? I can go to Kenya, I can go to Ukraine, all this stuff, all funded as research. I sometimes feel bad because I see that some thorough, genuine researchers who stay within their discipline and really know something about something, right? I'm just kind of patching that they don't get their stuff funded anymore because it's very fancy now to fund artistic research, because the crux is it does a magic thing, right? First, it argues, look, this artwork is actually research. And then it magically gets turned around and say, this research has a lot of impact outside the academy. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Yeah, because it's actually art and it is in an art gallery, which is not in the university. So I think, I mean, I've had a lot of discussions about this, especially with anthropologists in sub-Saharan Africa, who now find it very difficult to fund long-term research, because people like me come and they go 2 weeks into a dump and we make great work in a film, which is in a film festival, and everybody hooray, hooray. But if you want to do proper anthropology, you have to go there for a year. So I think that it's dangerous, but there's all these ifs, right? It's like, yeah, sometimes it's dangerous, but it's not a big deal, I think.
Okay.
You are saying that artist researcher is a magician?
No, a con artist.
Yeah.
But as I said in the beginning, not in a negative way. Don't get me wrong, right? I have nothing against anybody using any sort of strategy to do what they believe is valuable art or good art or whatever art.
Yeah, but I think in this, like, artist researcher is as dangerous position as being a, let's say, natural scientist or geologist, for example, or anthropologist, as you said, because you're doing field work, and humanities, mostly humanity researchers, they don't do field work. They sit safely in their offices. They do, this sofa research.
But I don't think that there's this and there's that, right? There are artist researchers who different sorts of paintings. I mean, they don't leave their workshop, and that's fine.
Okay, thank you. I've gone with my difficult questions. Let me do it, because I heard some ideas that are actually worth to discuss, and it's mostly the question of value. So you said, is it worth or not? What is value in artistic research? How can you actually somehow put the borders? Who can do it? Is it done? So all those questions, probably, can you actually you can answer if you wish. So there is no, this is not the question for one of you. So what is value? How can you say, for example, this work is good, it's important, it must be actually funded, not to forget this financial side?
Well, I mean, I tried to bypass it, right, by setting a criterion, which is not the only criterion. But if you kind of follow my story, which definitely not everybody will, the question is in terms of, does this project have, it's not about just, is it valuable as an artwork, but is it valuable as an artwork in this context? Does it make sense to do this art in an academic framework? Then one of my questions would then be, in what way does the artwork do something that you couldn't do in terms of producing original knowledge through other kind of disciplinary research? The other criterion would be, is this artwork, is there a possibility to in some way connect it, embed it, juxtapose it in a productive or any kind of, comprehensible way with other disciplinary outputs in that realm? But then again, as I already hopefully suggested, that is not an absolute criterion for whether this is a good work of art or not, right? There is fantastic work like an Yves Klein Blue. I don't care whether that is artistic research or whether, that's a good work, but for other reasons. And then we can discuss that as well, but maybe that's beyond the scope of this talk.
Vytautas, would you also say something about it? The value?
Yeah, I think, value is always judged by the community. The community of experts, community of peers, community of colleagues. So I think it's very subjective, and as Dani said, it's very trendy to support artistic research. It feels like you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable with this situation in front of your colleagues who are doing paintings only. No?
I think this is a very important point. The discomfort for me is that I see, on my perspective, I'm making this work, and a lot of us are doing this, which is supposedly criticizing the status quo of the social cultural model we live in, and at the same time, in the superstructure, I kind of see that the reason why we get funded and stuff is because actually it is complicit in the structure as well. Right? In the example I already gave you, that the kind of artistic researcher is oftentimes used as a kind of quick fix to generate this kind of obsession with impact and things. And it sometimes I do really believe that this is a kind of paradox. Because I genuinely am trying to point out these issues around electronic waste and do something with that. But I'm also very aware that there's a lot of stuff that I can't do, which have to do with long-term thorough research, which has to do with something that's not interdisciplinary necessarily, which in a way, I would argue also suffer from this whole thing. So the discomfort for me is really ideological, or maybe on a kind of broader cultural scale.
So you want to say that your artistic research is more impressive and it's not as thorough as this long-term research?
No, I'm not. No, the thing is, I'm saying it's more impressive in terms of, like in the UK, where I have a small research position. It's more impressive in terms of the criteria of research must have impact outside the academy, right? That's an obsession there now. It's more important than the peer reviews even. But it's not like it has absolutely, as I've tried to argue in my talk, I believe that there's really a value in doing this kind of research. But what I see as a kind of a problem, there's also a value in work that is not all about interdisciplinarity and all the and I kind of feel sometimes that this kind of thing, not just artistic research, right? The whole thing about art councils only wanting to fund interdisciplinary research. I've seen so many great psychologists doing terrible art projects with people, for example, with dementia and things. They're doing great research. Don't push them to do this shit. And the same as with artists. Don't push all artists to do research, right? Which is wishful thinking, but this is kind of my broader scope.
But I actually have a burning question here. What about aesthetics? Because artists always considered, okay, let's not say beauty, but the aesthetical consideration around artistic research should also be taken into account. So how can you put it into the picture? Is the aesthetic value where it is in a list? Is it secondary for artists?
I'm very interested in that question. It's great you bring it up because I think often, I think very clearly with any kind of conceptual art, but also in artistic research, aesthetic is very important. And I really believe that good work, it's clearly aesthetically sound as well, but we very rarely talk about it, I feel. We're often talking about the concepts, and I've done that as well. And now I've not said a word about the aesthetics, or maybe only the thing of the 60mm thing, but that was even kind of conceptual. I think the aesthetics is there is something very important. For me, the aesthetics is in the top, but it's interwoven with the conceptual realm of it. So the machine, this drop testing machine, is deliberately presented in this kind of totally clean modernist museum context to heighten this thing, to kind of heighten the grittiness of the destruction, but also this idea of something from a factory environment to kind of put it on this sort of museum pedestal. So there is a relevance in that. But yeah, again, I don't know. Yeah, but I find it interesting that and that's why I'm happy you bring it up. Often we don't bring it up. And it is a question we should deal with. What is the role of this? Because I think that there is really something there in terms of what the text or the kind of traditional humanities research can do and which art does. And it has to do indeed with that there is something with playing with aesthetic tension as well.
Yeah, I think it touches the question of communication and, let's say, rhetorics, question of communication of your research results. And it's much more difficult to write maybe aesthetical text than to do aesthetical art piece for artist researcher. No, you know this popular saying that one image stands for 1,000 words, and your machine maybe stands also for a research paper. So, I mean, this aesthetics is a very powerful tool in the hands of the artist research. And that's why maybe your outputs become more impressive and make a bigger impact outside academia and outside the research context.
So would you consider that art, whatever it is, because I understood that also texts can be part of the artwork for what Dani was saying and reading. But this is dealing with some kind of different science system for communication, including both texts and images, but speaking to people in kind of metaphorical level. Anyway, different level as everyday language. So would you think that art is actually dealing with metaphors? And even if it seems to be a quite usual documentary, it must be understood from the metaphorical level. And it's sometimes actually working into that direction what you are talking about, that it's actually talk to people more in this power and ask for attention more than like usual text or speech by scientists, whatever is there he comes or she comes from. Yeah, is it metaphorical? Would you consider your work or your communication as more in this meta level?
But yes, but a good research paper also might employ metaphors. And I know some research done on papers delivered by natural scientists, and the biggest impact was made only by these papers, who were very well constructed as, let's say, as writing pieces of writing with metaphors, good narrative structure, etc., etc. So I think this quality should be also kind of inherent in any kind of research.
Well, okay, another thing, sometimes the artworks in this field are quite challenging for audiences, or even asking for audiences that know more or are prepared in one or another way, or are, let's say, fast readers. If you can read very quickly the concept of artist that is yeah, somewhere in the book or whatever, and then you can understand the work in proper way. Yeah, what do you think? Are you expecting some quite different, prepared, knowing, educated audience, or you are just trying to kind of work with this audience? Yeah. You can also consider it as a game, an interactive game with audience, where one or part of the artist's intentions is to see the reactions.
I think, I mean, this is for me a general question of what a good artwork does, especially in what we now might call a post-conceptual era, right? Where all work is expected to be conceptual, but there is also a very strong sense of aesthetics or materiality. I find a good work of art something that operates on many different levels, i.e., it must, for me, also work if you've not read a word about it. There must be some sort of tension, and an audience might not get what the actual theme is. Also, there's things about my work that I don't get, right? So I don't see the work as a kind of finite thing, otherwise it wouldn't be a work of art. But I think it has to work as a kind of, as a thing in itself. And there the question of aesthetics is very important as well. And then I also like the work to operate, to kind of unfold into other realms if it is accompanied by either a text or maybe other work in its context, or in terms of my little film, if you show that ethnographic film from the 50s next to it, it kind of unfolds in a different way. So and then I mean, this is for me for any kind of artwork. When we're talking about art in the academy, then this unfolding or this connecting, for me, the richness and the potential of it is that it might connect or unfold in the direction of things that happen there, you know, which may be other people writing, or people making films, or people doing stuff in laboratories. That's where I see the thrill, so to say. And that's what I try to hint at a bit in reading the text with the work. I hope these works, and some of them, people have seen those works, they haven't read these texts that I just gave you. I do hope, and otherwise I would consider the works not very good, that they also work without the text, but they work differently. They open up yet other realms if you also think about the theoretical context. And then there's also people who see the work and they say, look, when I look at this, that what you mentioned, the text, is not the first point of reference for me. Actually, it makes me think of something else. And that's also how I develop my work, right? I've very often had people see stuff in my work, which I thought, oh yeah, you're right. I didn't think about that. But actually, that's something I didn't know about what I was after.
So maybe next important question is about the norms. So we discussed values. But what about norms? And when we talk about collaboration or interaction with audience in order to have this unfolding elements of works, it often has something to do with ethics, ethical considerations. No? Yes? Can you elaborate it? I think there is a certain moment of, especially now, where the science is so also institutionalized. You always go through ethical commission artists don't go there, right? Or is it also an important element of artistic research?
I mean, ethics should be important for everybody, right?
No, I mean, in the university, you normally, as a researcher, go through this ethical consideration. It's obvious for every project you do that. But I don't think that artists always have this so obligatory. So maybe, yeah. Have you probably some examples of ethical consideration? It's obviously there, especially for when you are doing something visually. It's not so clear where the borders are for, let's say, ethical visualization, and especially if you combine it with other works, as you said, if something might come out in some context or context. So I think there is an important element of ethical consideration as well. Is it done? How do you think? It's not only about your work, it's about the academia in general, or I don't know, art scene.
Yeah, I think, sorry, a lot of...
No, go.
Yeah, from my experience, artists are much more often trespassing ethical questions than scientists. And sometimes their artwork is made based on that. But I think they have more freedom. And also our doctoral students, then they don't consider a lot of questions which might come into the mind of the researcher. And then, yeah, sometimes they fail, but sometimes they somehow move forward and they have, let's say, more courage without having these ethical constraints. Of course, they consider some like common human or whatever post-human ethics, but we don't have in mind their ethics in the sense that researcher or scientists would have, because they have much more rigid protocols, I think, based on ethics. And every time you apply to project funding, you have to answer a long question, you know. And this is not the case in the, let's say, artistic world. If you apply for a project, is I think very seldomly, at least in our part of the world.
Well, in the UK, there's quite a lot of stuff to do around institutional ethics, also for people doing research in art. But I like the distinction you make between human or post-human ethics and the kind of ethical, what you call them, procedures. Because I would say, in science, the ethical procedures are very fleshed out, which often also just has to do with the nature of working. Like this often, there are, it often evolves around boundaries, whereas a lot of, and that's what came up before, a lot of research in the humanities and art even more is actually about boundaries that are dissolving. So the question of ethics becomes often much more of a discussion than an absolute. I'm interested in the ethics very much in terms of art in the context of a research process in which there might also be scientists from the natural sciences participating. Is that what the artwork can do, or the artistic input from the artist is to actually open up discussions about, in the realm of these human or post-human ethics, like why are these procedures in place? What role do they play? One thing that I really have a stake with in the UK, particularly in the US as well, is the kind of link between ethics and health and safety considerations for the researcher and all this stuff. In my view, these things often start to spill over in becoming also a sort of ideological force, right? If you think about the UK, the fact that the health and safety regulations for workers are the strictest in Europe, or among the strictest, and the unions are among the weakest in Europe, you must already be suspicious, right? What's going on there? And I think one example I've had, which was quite interesting, is that we did this work in Lagos on the dump that I showed you, and there were some natural scientists there as well. they in principle couldn't do that project because their ethical guideline was you cannot do any research that puts yourself in danger, and doing this stuff on the not allowed. Whereas for an artist, our ethical consideration was more in the realm of, okay, we have to balance the danger to our body with the merit of the project, which is a completely, that's something that you can debate forever. And one of the things that I came up with, like, well, if you think about performance artists, like the work of Ula and Abramovich, the power of the work lies in that they very, very carefully negotiate an issue of risk. So then through this kind of input, there were some things that these scientists then decided, oh, but actually we can do some of these things. And then the outcome of that, which is, I loved it, is that one of the guys said, oh, you know what, thus far I've been taking electronic waste from this dump site to my lab, taken it, put it all into little bits and looked at the toxicity of it. But now, because I've actually spent some time on this dump, which you would normally not do because of the ethics guidelines and stuff, I'm going to change my approach, because now I see that the contact that you have with these devices is very different from this kind of abstract idea of just putting them all into bits, which you do in the lab. So here through, and the thing, there's no right or wrong answer in it, right? But sometimes this sort of ethical negotiation or play from the perspective of art can actually contribute something that I would then call valuable in my kind of framework of artistic research in the academy in relation to other disciplines. And of course, then the last thing, if you think about my project, all these projects I've showed you, but particularly the one in Kenya and the film and the one in Ukraine, I mean, we can have another session on the ethics of that, right? What does it mean that a filmmaker from Europe represents African women who chose how they wanted to be represented, but still I made the film, and it's very complex. But these are kind of general ethical questions, I would say, which not necessarily have to do with that this was artistic research.
So we are actually running out of time. It's already after 8 o'clock in Latvia. But I would like to pose my last question, because I think it's one of the most important questions, and also coming back to the things that were just said. And actually, I think it was Vytautas who were talking about two communities. So my biggest idea here, or let's say my biggest question, is that this collaboration between two communities that actually artists must perform if they work between both is another additional task. And then there are different questions coming out of this position. That, for example, one is how to make a great performance or a great visual work without becoming just a kind of translator of the science to audience, or how not to use, from another side, scientists by kind of outsourcing content for my work, etc., etc. So how balance this kind of being in between there? How you give tips? How you just general ideas or some kind of consideration about the being in balance?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, and I was speaking about this trans-epistemic communities. I mean that you trespass the borders of different communities, and you have to speak a language of several communities in order to be understood and in order to be successful. But as we can see from our today's colleague Dani, that he is successful, and he is managing to convince several communities to fund his projects and make it possible. So yeah, this is, I think, artist researcher is always kind of juggling between these several disciplines or several fields of knowledge and practice. And that's why if we are kind of, I don't know, successful, where the community, these different communities starting to accept them and also respect, and we make their, let's say, carriers. But of course, there's a lot of artists who are failing, and they are only recognized in one of the community, and this is not a surprise. So it's when I speak about interdisciplinarity or maybe transdisciplinarity, I always have this uncertainty. I mean, how far you should be, let's say, knowledgeable, or how many skills you have to develop, how much you have to develop your skills in that specific discipline in order to be, I don't know, eligible or whatever to use these tools and methods. So this kind of profanity or amateurism is kind of always flying around, and I don't know how to solve it. And where is this limit? I mean, how many different disciplines artists can handle, and not to lose their, I don't know, confidence of the audience. And this is, I think, an important question, and it's difficult to find the answer, how to find the balance. But as I mean, the artist is finding the balance as soon as he or she is successful in convincing these different communities. And yeah.
Thank you. Dani,
Yeah, if you're asking for a tip, I would really suggest to regularly really take some time away or off. I've just been away for about a week just to read and do things, and really ask yourself whether the community you're part of, whether the context you're working in is genuinely what you believe in. Try to think of it separately from the pragmatic stuff. It is so easy to roll into this thing of, oh, I'm doing this, I don't know, I've had it myself, right? I'm doing this job at the university because, you know, I need to pay the bills and stuff. And that sounds like a luxury issue, right? But actually, here's the news. It isn't. If I, with the skills I have, would become some like third-rate consultant for whatever, I would earn 4 or 5 times the amount of money I make. Like the pay also at universities for artists is actually, I mean, it's enough, right? If you love it, it's fantastic. I'm not complaining. I'm earning a lot below the average income, or even the minimum income. But the thing is that don't do it for the money. If you've gotten to the point where you have a master's in art and you make decent work and stuff, and you realize what I make, you know, I hate all these people that make me do this stuff. Like, you can do something else. It's really an option. And or even already realizing that is actually helpful for me, because knowing that, oh, so, you know, so and then I also realize what I want to do, and I do it. But this, like, don't feel that you have to. I think it's important to really try to ask yourself the question and try to separate the pragmatic realm. And as again, it's not as luxury as you think it is, because there, I taught at the university in England once, and my flatmate, he just quit his university job. He showed me an ad in the paper, working at the Lay's crisp factory in Leicester, earned £5,000 a year more than my lecture job in the university. So really, don't worry. You don't need to do it for the money. Find a reason in the thing itself. That's what I would suggest. And take time for that. Switch off your internet. That's a very good thing every now and then.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've done. But however, the conversation can go on and on and on, I think. But I would like to thank my collaborators and partners in this conversation, Vytautas Michelkevičius and Dani Ploeger, and also thank our host, Ilva and Art, Science, Technology and Education Center in Liepaja for this occasion, for this opportunity to talk about all those questions that never end, as I understand. Okay, thank you very much. And bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Anna, you're muted.
Oh, no. They turned off their thing.
You are on it.
Hello. I hope there's still people.
There's a lot of people still, man.
Okay.
There's still people.
But
Please
wait,
don't go yet.
I was unfortunately muted when I invited people to feel free to switch off their cameras and still be tuned in the presentations.
No. Why did you mute? Ah, okay. We are just first, we are going to say some words, I think.
Okay.
So those who don't know,
You can go to Paula.
this will be a hello. This is a short presentation of the workshop that we did in this so-called iWeek Plus, which was not the iWeek itself, but the extended iWeek, the iWeek after iWeek. So we, with students in MP Lab, did some workshop, which is called MOCI, which is Modular Crankshaft Instrument. Would you like to say some words about that instrument?
Yes, I thought of this many years ago as an educational exercise because I'm a teacher of technology, mainly for high schools. So I thought of this product that could really talk about mechanical principles, and also to be a collaborative project that students can work on. And we finally got it years later now to try it out with students here. And this is the result of a 2.5-day workshop, basically. And they are all different modules made by different students, working on the same principle, a moving shaft that connects one module to the next. And what they do between it, it's kind of up to them. As the name suggests, people use crankshafts to get a rotational motion to a linear motion. And from them, it was their own creativity to make their own little module, and together it becomes this instrument both in sound and in visuals. So I think we kind of want to show it now. So
We'll just start.
We'll just start and you'll see what happens.
Māju izrakstīja, ka nevar dzirdēt.
that's the Moki. It's made up of 8 modules for now.
I think
But
9.
the,
I think there's 9.
Oh, there's 9 indeed. And then the 10th is the motor. That was in this case Elsa. The vision, of course, is to have many modules and then to be able to connect them differently. So this is not the end of the Moki. This is very much just the beginning. And I want to thank the students who are here. Arthur as our cameraman and Elsa as our motor woman. And also the students, of course, who were participants in our workshop and who made, well, really nice and diverse Mokis, which was quite great. So yeah, I will now turn off this camera so we can turn on the other one again and not have
Okay, so you have
feedback.
questions, you can talk in that.
Yeah, so give us a second and we'll switch cameras.
Yeah, or comments or whatever, we're still here. Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's done.
That was it from us. Thank you for this opportunity to showcase this. Oh, we are muted. Oh no, we're not muted.
No, we're not.
No, we are spotlighted. I mistook the symbols. Excellent. Okay, thank you all for being here. I'm not sure if there's questions. Well, one of the questions, of course, would be how can you also do this? We'll share the platform that we're building to support this because I want all the teachers everywhere to be able to do this with their own class. So all the shopping lists and the heights and the technical theories that they can teach to their students will be built into this platform. So when that comes online, I will notify everyone.
Sometime end of January.
Yes. Thank you.
Invite us to your organizations to work with your students.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes.
Good
Bye-bye.
night, everybody. Go research.
Go research.
Go art and research.
What is this word?
Brīnišķīgi, wonderful.
Ah, Danish.
Kristus is jauki.
What is jauki?
Nice.
Nice. Yeah.